Hello buddies, and welcome back to another history video. Today I'll be talking about the trench systems and the issues the soldiers on the western front of the war faced as a result of the stalemates. First of all, trenches in battle oftentimes signify a stalemate or deadlock. I talked a bit about that in the previous video, but let's go deep into it. Why was there a stalemate in this war? To remind y'all what a stalemate means, it is a situation where nobody fights anyone because of the lack of tactical opportunity. But, that's a big but, this is an oversimplification because we know that there was fighting in all of the years of the war. A stalemate is when there is little progress being made due to the lack of tactical opportunities in battle. So it isn't that no one's fighting anyone, it's that whenever they try to fight, it's a waste of time and resources because both sides can't get ahead. In this case, it's because both sides overpower each other. And, as I mentioned in the World War I war plans video, the failure of the Schlieffen Plan led to a stalemate in the Western Front, as both sides couldn't get an advantage in the battle. I also mentioned how the technological progress in weaponry had led to both sides being equally matched in terms of power. Both sides used machine gun defenses to clear enemy troops' advances, and you can see how that turned out. Both sides used bayonets and close combat weapons during battles. And by the way, bayonets are regular rifles or guns that have a sword shoved in the output hole. The generals also used old strategies that didn't take into account the technological advancements of weaponry. And finally, the conditions of the environments like the mud, rain, fields of dead bodies, the feces, and rats negatively impacted the soldiers, reducing their morale and productivity during the battle, resulting in the stalemate. So, trenches are dugouts that house the soldiers, shielding them from the enemy attacks and giving them the space to rest and re-strategize. It would be difficult to pinpoint when the first ever trenches were made, but when talking about modern trench warfare, the Rua Pika Pika Pa, translated to the bat's nest, is argued to be the foundation for it. This was a network of rifle trenches, bunkers, tunnels, and double palisade, which are basically the wooden stakes and stones version of barbed wire, built by warrior chief Teruki Kohiti, hope I said that right, in December of 1845 as the major defense against the British during the Battle of Rua Pika Pika in New Zealand. The kick to trench warfare is that given the advancements in tech and weaponry, the defenders held an upper hand, those that used artillery. However, advancements in mobility were not used as much. For example, the tank and planes, they were only used sparingly later on in the war. Trench warfare was really about exhausting the opponent, which is called a war of attrition, by bombarding them till their resources are almost depleted and then waging a decisive battle against them. This happened during the Battle of the Somme, which I will talk about in the next video. They look like this. The trench you saw in this scene of the Wonder Woman movie is an example of a frontline trench. See these sandbags over here? These are there to not only shield the soldiers from the enemy's view, but also protect them from incoming bullets. They have an elbow rest to peep out onto no man's land, which I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to guess what no man's land is. It's a piece of land, usually 230 meters long, that belongs to no side and is where the fighting usually happens because each side is trying to take over that land. So it becomes my man's land or something like that. It's the land where the stalemate happens, basically. This area was therefore one where many severe casualties occurred due to the bombardment of artillery and machine gun fire. The frontline trenches had enough elevation and steps that if there was a round of machine gun fire coming in, the soldier could be able to duck and save themselves from the bullet shots. So you could see how important these trenches were to protect the soldiers from the dangers of the war's technology. There's barbed wire surrounding the trench systems, which was used to trap and slow down the enemy soldiers. The trenches were built in a zigzag Lego-like pattern, which would block the soldiers on the other sides of the trenches from being fired upon, if an enemy got inside the trench, that is. Basically, they wouldn't be able to kill every soldier in the trench because it is closed off due to the architecture of the trench. So that's just the frontline trench. There are other trenches behind this one, which are the communication, support, and reserve trenches. Firstly, the support trenches house the kitchens, storage departments, and bathrooms for the military personnel. Behind the support trenches are the reserve trenches, which contains the production equipment of the fighting side. It houses the repairers of boots, tailors, hospitals like the casualty clearing stations that take in wounded soldiers, the headquarters where the generals think and tell, the blacksmiths, and the stables to keep the horses. Finally, the communication trenches connect all of these trenches together, so soldiers can move up and down and down and up. And finally, this time's for real, the small posts which are situated inside of no man's land, they're connected to the main trench system through what's it connected by? A communication trench, that's correct. So this is where soldiers keep a lookout. They spy on the enemy and shoot at them if they so much as dare to cross. So now you know the trenches, how they work, and why they were used in the first place. On a Monday, during the clear winter's day, a soldier took his daily cup of British tea, because this is insult from the British soldiers, moved from the support trench to the communication trench too, where he saw Timothy, a fellow soldier, and greeted him. Hi. Sound warning, sound warning, sound warning, sound warning, sound warning. Timothy the soldier is looking at the soldier. He seems annoyed at the rats and the cracker he put down, and as the other soldier looks at him, all he can see is lice. Not 1, not 5, not 50, but hundreds of lice. And the casual hardened mud on his boot. We say to him, "Want to write a poem for the Wipers' Times?" So let's break all of that down, shall we? The soldiers truly had a routine to follow. If there was not any ongoing battle which would require all soldiers to be ready at the front line, they would spend only 4 days there. They would be allowed to spend another 4 days in the support trenches, 8 days in the reserve trenches, and finally 14 whole days resting, culminating to a whole month's routine. Now there's 2 things to know about this routine. It's literally all or nothing, because the soldiers were either too exhausted to fight or too bored to fight. During the still time and the stalemate, the soldiers would perform chores like cleaning and repairing trenches. Groups of soldiers will also go out into no man's land at night during timeouts to recover wounded or dead soldiers, but also, spy on the enemy troops while they're there. The army was allowed communication with family and friends through pre-made postcards they had to fill out. And they were also sent goodies like chocolate, soap, and socks by family and organizations. And that tidbit about the Wipers' Times, that was a real magazine or a newspaper the soldiers created to pass the time. They recorded and wrote some comedic skits and poems about their living conditions. And you can guess why it was called the Wipers' Times. So these are the good and okay aspects of living in the trenches. But then there were the bad aspects of it. They faced issues like the dirt, disease, low morale, mental health problems, poor food, creeping and crawling animals, and of course the casualties. Mud was ever present due to the constant bombardments, shelling, foot traffic, and weather. It was hard enough to get through enemy lines due to the defenses. Add mud to that, and the troops are slowed down to a halt, meaning faster death. Disease from the pests around them like rats, flies, and lice. These animals crept around the soldiers for their leftover food and feces. And imagine, they were also taking care of horses, so even more feces. Soldiers who would not have time to change their shoes and clean their feet would get a disease called trench foot, which is when the hardened mud gets stuck to the skin of the foot. No, it's actually due to the muddy conditions, it basically disintegrated the tissues in the feet and also infection. People affected by this condition would have to be amputated, so the affected foot would be cut off to stop the pain. Aside from their physical injuries from battle, the soldiers had mental injuries. They suffered from PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder, referred to as shell shock back then, due to the constant exposure to triggering conditions like the bullet, shell, and death sounds of the battlefield, followed by the subsequent quiet of the night. Many soldiers had the thought of sudden death looming over their heads, and many deserted to escape that gruesome reality. Unfortunately, those that were caught leaving would be executed. Just like some of their physical injuries like lost limbs, scars, deformation, blindness, which were mainly caused by the dangerous shelling, their mental injuries lasted years. However, they were not taken seriously back then, as they were not considered real injuries, but rather something the soldiers just needed to suck up to. Yeah, because it's totally acceptable to just deal with the fact that you have to kill people, stab your fellow human being to the chest over and over to gain just a few meters of land that in the end you don't even know will be yours. Yeah. Though the soldiers had food, it was not always the case. You remember Germany's damaged transportation? Yeah, that would be an issue for the soldiers who needed food and medicine. The war became one of attrition in Germany. The losing side had to go into a state of total war, which is when everybody, even those that are not fighting and are back home, need to contribute to the war in some way, like sending out their own food and family members to fight. As I mentioned in the Bosnian crisis video, nationalism was the biggest reason why the war got as much support as it did and why it lasted for so long. The citizens wanted to represent and literally fight for their country. But you can only take so much pain and suffering. Alright, so we're done with this one now. Let me just give y'all something. Can you guess what I'm gonna give y'all? As always, I gotta give y'all some questions to test y'all. Now, this first question isn't usual. You gotta actually give information from your own head. It's not an objective question. So, number 1, list the features of the trench systems used in World War I. Number 2, which of the following best describes the feelings of the soldiers on the Western Front? Was it A, wet, dirty, bored, skilled, and terrified? Or was it B, sick, hungry, confused, sad, and hungry for blood? I'm asking for the one that best describes them. Number 3, which of the following was a reason as to why there was a stalemate in the war? A, the generals were using outdated maps of the area. B, the soldiers involved were not skilled enough. C, the technology employed by both sides countered each other. And D, soldiers were getting sick. So which one is it? And finally, which of the following are trenches? So these are all pictures of stuff. Which one is a trench? Let me know. Alright, I've given you time. Number 1 is support, reserve, communication, and frontline trenches. Those are the trenches that were there. Now, another feature of those specific trenches, they were deep, leveled dugouts, barricaded by sandbags and barbed wire. And finally, they were constructed in a zigzag pattern. There you go. So number 2, what best describes the feelings of the soldiers on the Western Front is wet, dirty, bored, skilled, and terrified. Number 3, it's the technology employed by both sides countered each other. That was the main reason. And number 4, the answer is A. And we're done! Once again, thank you so much for watching the video. If you've made it this far, drop a shiny emoji in the comments so I know who's who. And I hope that through my videos, you guys can understand the lessons at school better. I know I sure needed something like this when I was learning about the First World War. And yeah, so I'll see y'all in the next one where I'm going to talk about the weapons used during the battle, as well as how some of those weapons were used in some battles, like the Somme, Passchendaele, all that. And I hope you can get a clear picture by me doing that. But it also means that the video is going to be a longer one. It's not going to be the usual 14 minutes. It's probably going to be like 20-something minutes. Okay, so, this is me. This is a nugget. This is another. Bye, goo!